you kind of suggested that we weren't asking precise enough questions 7 months ago in Iran, and that's why some of the lack of clarity is here. So for the sake of clarity, could you describe for me and for the record the White House's understanding and the delineation between leverage and ransom?
Well, Hans, I want to be really clear about this. I was not trying to imply any sort of lack of effort or expertise on the part of reporters who are asking questions. The observation that I'm making is that there are a whole lot of details related to this series of agreements. And the truth is, the questions that you guys were asking about the safety and security of American citizens who are being released, about how we could verify the commitments that Iran was making with regard to their nuclear program, about the mechanism for releasing these American citizens and what prisoners were released in the United States in exchange for them. All those were legitimate questions, and all those were answered in detail, including, in some cases, on the record in the President's remarks to all of you. In other cases, particularly as it relates to the prisoners who were released, there were statements issued and information provided by the Department of Justice. So I guess the point that I'm making here, Hans, is not just that there was a failure on the part of the press corps, just the observation that this was extraordinarily complex. And there are lots of details that people were justifiably interested in. And I think understanding the details, the kinds of details that I just outlined, I think would have an impact on people's appraisal of the benefits of the approach that we have pursued. The point that I'm making is the kinds of details that we're talking about now, while it might be interesting fodder for a read in a spy novel on the beach, don't change our assessment about what exactly was concluded and how the United States benefited from the conclusion of this series of agreements.
I'll concede it was all very complex, but just my simple question is, what's the difference between a ransom and leverage?
Well, I think the point is simply this. The United States was pursuing 3 different agreements, trying to resolve 3 different issues with the Iranians. And the nuclear agreement was one that Secretary Kerry and others, Ambassador Wendy Sherman among them, spent years, many sleepless nights, trying to negotiate with the Iranians. And we completed that agreement. And that actually went into effect. Implementation day was actually the day before the release of these American citizens and the day before the completion of the financial settlement. What we have made clear is that the American citizens in Iran who were unjustly detained were released in exchange for the United States releasing some prisoners that were held here. These were individuals who were convicted of crimes like trying to circumvent sanctions that were in place against Iran.
The $40 million was the leverage.
The $400 million was a separate settlement.
Where is the timing and the leverage come in? Because the State Department has used the word leverage,
Yeah.
The President has used the word ransom, and I'm just trying to square them.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm saying is that what we made clear to the Iranians is that we expected them to navigate the complexities of all of this. We were doing our part to release the 7 prisoners. There are also 14 other individuals who had red notices against them dropped. They were part of this agreement to secure the release of the unjustly detained Americans. But this is a complicated arrangement, and we expected them to keep their commitments.
Let me then ask another simple question. Is there a difference between a ransom and leverage?
Well, listen, Hans, I guess I quibble with this because
Well, I mean, every time, we've been sort of dinged for not asking precise questions. We're trying to ask them,
Yeah.
and then we don't get direct answers. I mean,
Well, first of all,
what's the President has said no ransoms. The State Department has said leverage was paid. So just how do we bring those two together? And if there's no distinction, there's no distinction. But we're giving you a chance right now to say, is there a distinction between ransom and leverage? And you're quibbling with the question, which seems like a pretty basic question.
Well, first of all, I'm not dinging the press corps, and I certainly didn't mean to ding you or anybody else for not asking precise questions. As I mentioned earlier, the fact is this is extraordinarily complex. The notion of a ransom, I think, is often perceived as paying money in exchange for the release of unjustly detained individuals. That's not what occurred here. What occurred here was a mutual prisoner release. Iran released 4 American citizens who were being unjustly detained in Iran, and we brought them home. The United States released 7 individuals who had been convicted of crimes and were being held here in the United States. Well, we got to check with the details in the Justice Department. I don't know if all of them had been convicted, but at least 7 of them were being held here in U.S. prisons because they were either convicted of or accused of a crime. So that is the.
I heard the definition of ransom. The definition of leverage is.
Well, that's not a word that I've used, I guess, is what I would point out. So you can ask somebody else about that. But we've been quite clear exactly about what led to all of this.
Earlier, you were quite clear that you were very proud of the entire agreement. Were you proud that leverage was used?
We are, again, that's a word that I have not used. And the point is, we are quite proud of the benefits that have been enjoyed by the American people. And we are quite proud of the way that we have prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, convinced Iran to roll back key aspects of their nuclear program, cooperate with intrusive inspections of their nuclear facilities, secured the release of 4 unjustly detained Americans, and saved the American taxpayers potentially billions of dollars. And we've done all of that without firing a single bullet or deploying a single troop.
If leverage isn't a word you're comfortable using, how would you describe the delay, the timing?
Well, I think what is clear is that
It's just one word. If leverage doesn't work, ransom doesn't work, what works?
What works is that Iran released 4 American citizens who were being unjustly detained in exchange for 7 individuals being released in the United States. That was the exchange. That's the direct exchange that occurred. This was a mutual prisoner release.
The mechanisms, or to use your words earlier, the arrangements. How would you describe that arrangement?
Well, I think I just did. They released 4 people that were being unjustly detained in Iran. We brought them home. There were 7 individuals that were being held in the United States, and we released them. That's the mutual prisoner release. People have described this as a quid pro quo. That's the quid pro quo. They released 4, we released 7.
One final one. If you're not using the term leverage, do you disavow? Do you want to walk back that leverage? Is leverage not something you're comfortable coming from the White House?
Well, what is clear, Hans, is that the United States was much more concerned about completing the agreement to bring our 4 unjustly detained American citizens home than we were in reaching the financial settlement. The Iranians might have had a different set of priorities. They may have valued that money more. You'd have to ask them. So it's clear what our priority was in this instance when it came to those 2 transactions that were completed on the same day. But again, the reason that we quibble with this notion of a ransom is pretty straightforward. The quid pro quo here was the release of 4 Americans by Iran in exchange for the release of 7 prisoners in the United States. Okay.
Thank you.
Alexis.
Josh, can I just add